Get into with a question as well.
All right. You ready?
Yep.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Complete Game podcast by Kurt Schilling and with Kurt Schilling and Garrett Schilling. What's up, G?
What's going on, everybody? How we doing?
This is gonna be a meaty one. We're gonna talk injuries, pitching specifically, and then we're gonna dive back into the Rockies for a lot of different reasons. But we're gonna start off with our favorite thing, the whiteboard, and we're gonna talk about, and I'm gonna try and explain for you fans watching baseball to help you understand some of the physical stuff behind. Now, obviously, I don't have a medical degree, but when I was hurt,
Not a real one. You have an honorary one, I'm pretty
yeah,
sure.
I do have an honorary. Um,
Dr. Kurt Schilling.
right. But one of the things that I was able to do early in my career was when I was hurt. I'm very detail oriented, and one of the things I was able to do was see an autopsy, understand the shoulder, and study. I studied everything about the shoulder. I had labrum issues. I never had Tommy John or rotator cuff stuff. Thankfully, rotator cuff, we'll get to it, is almost a death sentence, regardless of the era. It's just such a and I'll explain why. But I want to explain a couple things as it relates to the physical pieces of and pardon my medical drawings because they're not really good. But we'll start with the labrum. And the way to think of the labrum is a like a washer sitting between a nut and a bolt, a rubber washer. So this is my humerus, not mine, but this is your humerus, and this is the bone of your humerus that goes into your shoulder socket. Okay. So this little nub sits inside there. This black thing is your labrum. It rings the joint and insulates and protects the joint. And what it does is it stops this round knobby bone. It stops it from bouncing around. It stabilizes the shoulder. There's your shoulder blade, your collarbone, your clavicle, and at the end of this is something called an AC joint. And that little blue thing in the middle there, that's a bursa sac. That's a something to keep the two bones from rubbing together and all the things that go with that. And you'll hear people will get injected into people will have injections in the bursa. It'll get inflamed sometimes and whatnot. But basically, the labrum, what happens when you get a labral tear? So this black line is your bicep tendon, and the black thing on top of it is your labrum. It's this black thing right here, right? This is your labrum right between the shoulder. And what happens when you get a labral tear is part of this tissue will tear off or tear, and that they use a clock to diagnose it. When I had my labral tear, I had a tear from 11 to 2, so it was along the top edge. Um, and what happens is that creates instability. So what you have is this little round bone. Instead of when your arm rotates up and down, this bone moves in the socket. It creates instability and it bounces around, and um, you lose stability. So what you have to do is you have to go back in and sew it up. Real quick note: when I was younger, I was about 13. I broke my arm, and I had an X-ray done. And the doctor, our family doctor at the time, told me, and I can't remember the name of the medical term. Somebody out there will help me with it. But basically, your bicep comes up your humerus and it attaches to your labrum and that's obviously a very important attachment. 17% of the population, this was the statistic he gave me at the time, had a different sort of bicep tendon, and I was one of them. Basically, what happened is instead of my bicep attaching like this, my bicep split into two pieces and attached at my labrum like that. And it's apparently something similar to what cats, felines have. And what it does is it creates more stability in the shoulder. And it was something like 17% of the population had this anomaly. It's not a defect, it's just an anomaly. But somewhere north of 80% of pitchers in the big leagues had this. So I think there's a reason for that both ways. Anyway, what happens is, and I had my surgery back in 1995, and Dr. Craig Morgan, who was one of the best shoulder surgeons to ever live, did some what they called experimental surgery in how he fixed it. And basically, what they have to do is they have to go in and drill holes, and they have to anchor it down and reattach it and seal up which is why it takes a year to come back because you have soft tissue damage and all the things that go with that. But nowadays, labral surgery is not, and I'm using air quotes, a big deal because it's fixable and the methods have become so advanced, and the technology has become so advanced, and it's a lot less invasive of surgery. Most of them are nowadays, which is a big thing. Um, but I threw over 3,000 innings after I had my labrum surgery, so obviously had a very good doctor who did an amazing job. And I would tell you the three things we're going to talk about. That's probably the safest one in a sense. I think it's now tied with Tommy John, believe it or not, of one of the things you can come back and be healthier and throw better. And I came back throwing harder because of all the stuff that I learned when I was hurt. Um, so that's when someone tears their labrum, that's what's happening. They get a tear here, and you'll hear, like I said, 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock or 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, which is dramatic, half of it. But it creates instability, and this little round bone at the top of your humerus is bouncing around in the shoulder socket. And that creates, you can get an inflamed bursa. Some guys will have their bursa removed if it gets too inflamed, and you'll hear problems with the AC joint as well, and that's at the top of the shoulder. And you'll have what they call impingement, which is when you get instability in the shoulder, it pinches up there, and that's not a good thing. So next we have RC rotator cuff. So your rotator cuff is made up of four tendons that come from muscles. You have the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the subscapularis, and the teres minor. Now, here's the thing. If you can see this, these four come off of muscles in your body. Your scapula in the front, and in the back, your subscap, and they come out of muscles, and they end up being four tendons, and they attach directly to the bone, which is why, for the most part, when you tear a rotator cuff, it can be a death sentence depending on the degree of the tear, because when you reattach it, you're having to create something you can't, which is the tensile strength of the human anatomy is always going to outperform surgical repair. There's just nothing you can do about it. But these are attached. And so when you see the supraspinatus comes at the front, this is kind of a round the clock look because two of them are in the back, two of them are in the front. And if you think, I couldn't think of an analogy, but think about if you hang a cooking pot over fire and you suspend it with four chains, each one of those four chains is the muscle. If you tear one off, then the pot gets closer to the fire. The fire is injury. And once one of those breaks, you're closer to the pot. And you have to kind of take a link out of the chain to put it back, so it's not going to ever be the same. And unfortunately, with rotator cuff surgery, that is most often the case. Now, again, the degree of the tear is a big deal. But basically, when you talk about a rotator cuff tear, you're talking about one of those tendons tearing. Some are a lot. And by the way, it was kind of funny, G, when I had mine done, and they do MRIs, and the only way to ever actually know these things is to go in and look. But that's an invasive surgery. They're working on technology where they can peek inside without really damaging tissue. And apparently every pitcher in history has damage on the rotator cuff, which is normal because again, you're doing something that
Wear and tear.
you wear and tear, right? Same thing with the labrum. You're going to have little nicks and abrasions and tears. Nothing in there is going to ever be pristine after you pitch.
Yeah.
But what you get is if you get, say, for example, you get like a partial tear where part of that tears, then you can go in there and I think most pitchers will have like little partials everywhere, but the rotator cuff tears when that happens, when it completely breaks and you have to reattach it. And you're doing it with basically what they would do is they would use like almost like a screw hook. You screw it in, and it's got a hook at the end of it, and they would tie off. They would take either cadaver ligaments, tendons, or in the case of Tommy John, they'll go in and take part of your hamstring or part of your forearm. They'll take an internal muscle to fix it as well. But this one, the rotator cuff is always 1 to 10 pitcher arm injuries. Rotator cuff's a 10, right? A labrum used to be like an 8. And you look at guys like Koufax and guys in the 60s and 70s, when they got hurt, they were done. They couldn't be fixed, right? My dad had ACL, MCL in his knee done in the 60s and had a scar the size of Texas. Nowadays, you see these little holes of scars. Yeah. But this is a big deal. But the big one we're talking about now is, and Gary's got some phenomenal stats that we're going to get to because it's absolutely relevant. All three of these are more prominent, more relevant for one reason: velocity. That
Yeah.
we talked about this over. The hunt for velocity has destroyed.
I have a quote, but
Go ahead.
from Glenn Fleissig, I think I'm saying that right, the biomechanics research director of the American Sports Medicine Institute, a leader in this field and a consultant to the MLB, saying essentially the UCL is being pushed beyond what it can take, and we've developed a situation through mad science where we are pushing the body beyond what that ligament can handle,
Right.
which is exactly what you're talking about.
Great analogy. And well, let's take a quick trip back about 20 years to steroids. Steroids create uh, an imbalance. Steroids create muscles that are too strong for the tendons attaching them. So when you saw guys have really awkward injuries, like a ligament tearing off a bone somewhere that other than a joint, steroids create strong muscles that tendons can't support. It's a muscle development, not your tendons don't get bigger and stronger with your muscles. Your muscles just get bigger, and your body can't protect that. So you're going at velocities and speeds. NFL is a great example. Why you see now you're seeing catastrophic injuries. You know, you saw there's always been, but nowadays you see the four ligament tear on the knee.
It's especially when you see those guys that come out of college
Right.
and in
Yep.
baseball, especially when they put on that extra 20,
Yep.
30 pounds, even
Yep.
if it isn't steroids, it's 20, 30 pounds of your body has not been
Right.
accumulating that type of
Exactly right.
impact.
Exactly right. So well, let's go to Tommy John. Tommy John and Garrett, I want you to throw me. I know you were looking at this. Talk to them about the statistical changes in both Tommy John injuries and arm injuries in general over the last 20 years.
So we've seen a market uptick, and it's been written about in nauseum since about 2012. There's been a major uptick in UCL surgeries in particular over the last. This is from MLB.com and David Adler. If you're interested in looking at all these charts, I'll link it also in the description below. But in 2010, this is both major and minor league. There were a total of 104 UCL procedures done. And then 7 years later, 2017, 166, a small but not crazy uptick. And then just 7 more years after that, we have 281 with 240 being in the minor leagues and 41 of those taking place in the major leagues. And then coming off of that, we also have the days that it takes to recover from surgeries like that, where back in 2009, it was at about 245 guys were being placed on the IL or IR at any point, with about 12,500 days lost on that IR with those 245. And then in 2024, that number is almost doubled to 475 with almost 32,500 days lost on the injured reserve. Since 2014, the number of players throwing 95 miles per hour at the Perfect Game National Showcase has gone from 5 in 2014 to 36 in 2024. So basically, more to what Glenn Fleissig, I think is how you say it, he was saying, is that we've just, as a total, as a whole, have started to push our bodies beyond what has been capable.
Now let's think about that. The word around the world with sports is athletes have gotten bigger, faster, and stronger. Medicine has gotten quote unquote better. Why are major league pitchers the only ones regressing? The only change is exactly what you just noted, is the change in velocity. The human body, throwing a baseball in and of itself is an unnatural act, but at the block, and you know, we've talked about it again. We saw the kid from Vanderbilt the other day throwing on television, and I'm watching kids in high school throw, and mechanics have literally disappeared. These guys, nobody, very few guys in the big leagues are pitching with proper pitching mechanics, and they're throwers. And that's why you're seeing the massive uptick. So let's talk about what Tommy John actually is. Okay. I'm going to move the mic over here so we can see this. All right. So there are three what they call bundles. UCL, by the way, is the ulnar collateral ligament. And there are three bundles. There is the posterior, the intermediate, and the anterior. And I numbered them 1, 2, and 3 here. And they basically sit in this part of the elbow. So this is the bottom of your humerus and the rounded piece of it at the end, which is, and the radius and the ulna come, they have a curved bottom. So basically what you have is you have on the other side of the on the other side of this bone, or on the other side of the bicep or the humerus, you have a rounded elbow socket, and it glides in, and there's soft tissue there, and you have your funny bone, which is your ulnar nerve that runs up here and up the back, right? And these three bundles keep the elbow joint, like the labrum in the shoulder, they keep the elbow joint stable, right? So what happens is you get a tear in one of these, and what that creates instability. This bottom of your humerus is now bouncing around in your elbow socket, which is creating massive problems because the ulnar nerve is now being uh, uh, irritated and played with in ways it's not supposed to. So you see, I numbered them here. These bundles come right around the inside of the elbow, basically right here, right down here. Now I have a little scar. I had a bone spur, but your ulnar nerve runs back here, and these bundles all attach in here to hold everything in place and to keep the joint where I can throw. And I never had elbow problems beyond the bone spur. So, and I never had Tommy John. But what happens is when these bundles tear, I now have a bone that's drifting around in my elbow socket. Now this is a pretty amazing surgery, by the way, how they do this. So you can see the little dots here. Basically, what happens is, and the reason it takes so long to heal from, they'll drill three holes in your ulna, and they'll drill two holes in your radius, and they'll drill two holes at the bottom of your humerus, and they'll take tissue. They'll take, again, cadaver tissue or tissue from other places of your body, and they basically will tie uh, a long period of knots to these seven holes, and they'll basically restabilize your elbow by putting uh, I guess rope, and they'll suture them together. Now that's the 18 months. When you talk about healing from Tommy John, that's why you have to let soft tissue heal, and that's generally why you hear a lot of guys that have Tommy John talk about how good they feel, how fast. And it's one of the dangers of coming back from Tommy John is everybody feels better than they actually are. But you have a lot of soft tissue that has to heal around drilled holes through the bone. Um, and, to be honest with you, not all doctors are created equal.
I mean, it's like any great quick fix, like we hear a lot about Toradol being used to
Right,
to get guys into game, but all that is just blocking pain temporarily. That when you're talking about these joints
right,
rubbing up against bone or socket,
right,
that is still happening. You just can't feel it
right.
happening,
Well,
which
there's a certain amount of it that your body does by nature, which is expected. And again, when you're doing the thing that they're doing, and you're doing it at the velocities and the speeds they're doing it at, it's unsustainable. And
it's unnatural.
right. And it gets back to when you look at, like I said, when you look at these deliveries these days, a lot of them are burnout guys throwing the ball as hard as they can, and the amount of stress they're adding extra strain, extra stress on their arms, and they're doing so for less velocity and less command. These pitchers that throw 95 with these mechanics could throw 97 with better command if they changed their mechanics or if they fixed their mechanics in
But
a
that's
sense.
never been an emphasis at any point in their development. They threw 90 in high school, so when they got to college, they had to throw 95 in college, and then they were trying out at the pro showcase, they had to throw 97, and that's all, quite literally, all they're focused on. I've
Well,
been
and the
to a few of
problem,
these pitching camps growing up.
well, yeah,
It was about velocity. There was hardly any mechanical sort of, hey, sit down, here's a real teaching coaching moment,
right.
which is where we've talked about this in
Well,
other episodes. That's where you became who you were.
right. And it gets back to one of the conversations we had in a very early episode. Coaches are terrified. They don't want that guy that throws 93 in A ball to suddenly be throwing 91 in double A.
I mean, we're talking about it pre-show, and we're gonna get into it in a minute. But the guy that usually is the first one to get thrown off the boat is like the manager in
Right,
Colorado.
right, right. But I blame the game for that change in focus on velocity, but also you got to blame organizations for it too. I need my pitching coaches in the minor leagues to be teaching and making these kids better each year. That's what your minor leagues are for. And now with the windows closing on the minor leagues and these kids getting so many fewer innings, the teaching has to be done in a smaller window. None of that's good for the game. None of that's good for the health of the pitchers. And you look at a guy like Paul Skeens, who they had, I think, 9 or 10 million invested right at the draft. Like, no one's going to change Paul Skeens, and they're, I think he'd be the first guy to tell you he's always looking for bet to be better. And I think there is a chance he could be better. He could throw consistently a little harder or consistently with a lot more command if his mechanics got evened out, smoothed out a little bit. But yeah, no. So I wanted to touch because everybody talks about it because it's such a prevalent part of the game. If you play fantasy baseball, you've got half your roster with the dreaded red IL letters next to their name. Most of them are pitchers, and that's it's not good for the game. Jacob deGrom not pitching is not good for the game, I want to see more pitchers start pitching more and being healthy because the starting pitcher that throws 240 innings is no longer around, and there's no reason for that. It doesn't have to be that way, but you're going to see an inverse. The higher the velocity demands go, the lower total innings pitch you're going to see from your starters. You got guys winning the Cy Young throwing 160 innings, which is what usually you had somewhere around the All-Star break. Uh, and that's different. And I don't think it's fun. I always liked growing up Ryan against Seaver. The starting pitcher antagonist protagonist kind of thing. That doesn't happen anymore. You don't have those matchups because you're going to see one guy for 5 innings and the other guy for six, and I don't think that's good for the game. So, gee, we were looking at a couple different topics, but the Rockies jumped up.
I was going to say that's the one that you're most emboldened about.
Yeah, yeah. So 2 days ago, what was it? 2 days ago, the owner of the Rockies, a and I'm going to go back. I'm going to make sure I'm getting names right here. But there was an article in a sports website talking about two days ago the owner of the Rockies, Dick Monfort, the CEO, came out and the GM, and they publicly backed everybody. And I've been around and I was in the game, and everybody, I think, for the most part, knows this. That a lot of times that when the owner has to come out and say something, it usually means that the conversation is not just happening in the bleachers. He came out and said that he had total confidence they were going to do what they were going to do. They're just playing terribly. They lost 21-0 the next day. Bud Black got fired today, and Mike Redmond, the hitting coach, got fired. And I think they brought their bench coach in to take over for the rest of the season, and we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, Warren Schaefer is their third base coach. He's going to take over for the rest of the season. Clint Hurdle, former Colorado manager, is going to be the interim bench coach. So I started looking at this, and we had talked a couple episodes ago. You and I had talked about what my impressions on what it's going to take for the Rockies to end up being something that matters and means something in baseball. And one of the upsides is Colorado. The fans in Denver love baseball, so they're going to show up. It's a beautiful ballpark. But we got into conversations, pretty in-depth conversations about what has to happen. And I kind of did a statistical deep dive and was kind of taken aback by what I found. And I'm going to say this in none of this is personal. And it's hard for I don't have a problem criticizing people for effort and all the things that go with that. But this is not personal. This is just looking at it from a former player's perspective. They're terrible. They have and again, guys are underperforming and all. You can't have guys performing well when you're 7-33, but they have four guys on their roster. An OPS of 700, which is on base percentage plus slugging. An OPS of 700 is not good. It's not horrible, but it's not. I don't know what the metric is in baseball for good and bad. They have four total players on their roster with an OPS over 700. You've got Beck, Goodman at 830, 886, and then you've got Ryan McMahon at 736, although he's hitting 211, and Moniak at 702. The rest of they are last in pitching with an ERA of almost 6. They are next to last in batting, which kind of blows my mind because even a bad Colorado team should still be hitting because of the environment they hit in. And the inexcusable piece to me, and the thing that kind of made me come to the realization that you can't fire the team. They're 7-33. You can't fire the players. So the manager always takes the brunt of the axe or the head chopping axe and the coaching staff and things like that. And that's what happened to Bud. They're last in fielding. This is a roster, and again, I'm not trying to who are a roster of players who aren't very good. Now, that's not all of them, but it's the manager's managing the people on the field that the GM and the scouts gave him. And they're 7-33, not because of his managing skills, but I mean, there's something like again, batting. They're last in just about everything. They have 32 home runs as a team. They're what's their run differential, Garrett?
Minus 128
In 40 games.
in 40 games. The White Sox, MLB's worst team ever last year, had a 247 win percentage at the end of the season. They are currently sitting at 175. So
So we're
it's
talking about historical
on
batting.
pace to be
Right.
historically the worst team of
So
all time.
the players on the team, they can
Hey, you're not saying anything that can't
no,
be said
no,
like,
and it's not anything that I'm sure the owner doesn't feel like. And I'm sure that there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, or maybe there aren't, that are, if they turn this around and win a championship in 6 years, I'm not sure how many of these guys would be on the roster. Um, but their team leader in ERA is at 577. 577. Um, their team lead in batting average is qualified is Hunter Goodman at 288. But they're last in fielding. I can understand you're going to be in a slump over 40 games and you're not a good team and you're struggling to hit or you're struggling to pitch, but you're struggling to do both and you're not playing good defense. That there's no excuse for that. This speaks to the people running the baseball operations. They're clearly not drafting Major League Ten. You look at somebody like St. Louis or somebody like Baltimore, somebody like the Yankees, who consistently from the back of the draft, for the most part, pull major league talent or create and develop major league talent. None of that is happening here. None of that is happening here, and that's almost I look at it and I try to take a mentality of okay, I'm running this organization
also for a team that's drafted very high,
very
like
high.
every year. I don't think they've made the playoffs
Right.
in 8 7 8 years.
Right. And 18-19 was the last time I
Yeah,
think they
so
back-to-back
five,
seasons.
six,
So
seven
yeah,
years.
but and the baseball draft is a different gig than the other drafts for the most part.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a crapshoot a lot of times. However,
But it's a lot of what you're talking about. It's development and
well, if you draft baseball players, and I know that sounds generic, but there are certain guys you don't draft projects. And we talked about the pitching. I think you literally spend this entire June draft, top to bottom, 20 pitchers. Now, if there's a no-brainer college bat available to you at the top that is a Dylan Cruz or somebody, that level of okay. But I think you have to go the reverse. I think you have to, Theo Epstein's philosophy was I'm going to draft my hitters and buy my pitchers. I think in Colorado you have to do the reverse.
well, that's because what Theo was doing
Right.
was adding finishing touches.
Right. And
You're talking about a
he had
complete.
an open pocketbook.
You're talking about an organizational overhaul,
Right.
right?
Top to bottom.
Yeah.
Here's what we're going to look for. Here's what we're going to draft. You don't ever draft guys sight unseen. I don't care what the sabermetrics say.
Do you think people are doing that?
Oh, absolutely. I know teams are
That's
doing it.
insane.
Teams
I
have-
mean, without seeing them in
Teams
today's
have
day and
removed
age,
their scouting departments and they draft on pure sabermetric numbers.
I would love to see a rundown of what teams are doing that
Yep.
versus what their
I
record
remember
has
reading
been
that and
since.
thinking to myself, "Oh my God!" But their belief is that that's why look around the big leagues. There's a couple guys who look like beer league softball players, right? They would have never been drafted 30 years ago because the scouts with the eyes on would have said, "Oh my God, look at how fat this guy is. He can't run." Blah.
I mean, I don't know. There's always been guys like that in baseball, though.
But you're looking at
that's
college guys getting drafted because they had a 488 on base percentage and they walked more than they struck out. So sabermetrically, they're saying this guy absolutely knows how to hit. And it's
yeah. They're saying the Moneyball.
Absolutely.
Billy, this is Kevin Euclid. He's the Greek god of walks.
Right. That's exactly right. But teams this is the sabermetric, and this is where there's a sweet spot between sabermetrics and old school. And I think I'll lean closer to sabermetrics than old school because the old school formula is drafted. They drafted
Dustin Pedroia would have never been drafted in the old school.
No.
So that's where you're talking about. There's a
Jose
hybrid.
Altuve,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. if you were that size, you were a defender. You weren't a hitter, right? But top to bottom, the philosophy needs to be reset completely, and you need to approach this with a holistic organization, top to bottom, rewrite it all.
I mean, even more so, you're like you were saying, if you're a bad team in Colorado, you go the pitching route because of the environment you play in too. Because if you can figure that out, you can start to win 3-1 ball games. We were talking about earlier the run differential versus how many they're losing every game by 4 runs. They're not just losing games; they're
Right.
getting their ass kicked.
They're
Like,
getting thoroughly beaten.
yeah,
And so we talked about the two big ones to me are four seam power arms and three outfielders or four or five outfielders that can just fly. I need because covering ground in the outfield isn't park dependent.
yeah,
And
we
you're
we
in the
talked
NL
about that too.
West
Yeah.
with all those big outfields. So it's going to serve you well. What you have to do is transition from like, and I said this before, if you can find an Aaron Judge who can cover ground and hit 60 homers, great. But you also have to build a roster with the sense that 26 players, you're going to need kind of an 18-man staff between the big leagues and AAA, but you're also going to need bench players who aren't particularly built as bench players in the sense that you can't play these guys 13 straight days on a 13-day homestand. It's different up there.
Yeah.
Recovery's different up there. So not only do I want to make sure all the science, yeah, and I'm sure there's science beyond for science out there that they're doing all these things, but rest and recovery is different there. And it's the first, to me, the first situation I've ever seen where I would approach it probably trying to build a six-man rotation, a legit six-man rotation, because and what I could do is on for the 10-day homestand, I build a six-man rotation. When I go on the road, my sixth starter becomes my swing man because I don't need it on the road as much.
Yeah.
But I need to be ballpark favored. I need to have a home field advantage.
That 6-man rotation becomes a tough thing when you get a guy like you, though, who
Right,
doesn't want to have 6 men in
right,
that
right.
rotation.
But I would
But
have
you have to know
because
that. That's where
I would have
scouting and
understood
meeting
it.
the guy.
I would
That's
have
where,
understood it, right?
yeah.
Listen, again, I watch the ballpark. I know what a nightmare it is to pitch in. So you don't have to tell me about all this stuff. But listen to these numbers. Their leader, Antonio Senzatella, their ER leader, has 8 starts with a 5.77 ERA and a 1.92, not ERA, WHIP.
Whip.
Two
Yeah.
runs, two runners an inning. 39 innings, 66 hits. The more glaring one is 39 innings, 19 punch outs. Contact guy. Can't be a contact guy in Colorado. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work. And again, I hate to talk like this because these guys are still better than anybody you've ever seen,
Yeah.
anybody you've ever played with at any level ever. So I'm talking about in relation to major leagues. Kyle Freeland, who's a very good pitcher, 39 innings, 58 hits, 30 punchouts, 6.41 ERA, and a 1.65 whip. Herman Marquez, 37 innings, 50 hits, 20 punchouts. Chase Dollander, 28, 33, 25 punchouts, but 13 walks.
I know you're afraid of sounding denigrating. You don't. You sound when you read this. It's help these
Right,
guys. Like
right,
seriously.
right. And you know, I'm looking down this staff, and the only arm I see on this staff is a 29-year-old reliever. Jake Bird has 24 innings, 17 hits, 33 punchouts. That's the guy you have to have coming out of your pen. But 14 walks. Like that, you know. And again, back when I played, there was always guys but you can't have anybody on your staff that can't command the strike zone. You have to have four-seam power arms. I don't care what side they throw from. And you have to have them top to bottom in the staff, which means you have to draft a ton of power arms and develop them. Don't let them get to the big leagues throwing the way they're throwing in A ball. I don't care. You have to, and what it means is you put a philosophy together and you empower your coaches.
So
I don't want to see Garrick Schilling in the big leagues throwing like he's trying to break somebody's hand. I want to see a pitcher.
or make my team. I want him to be established,
Right,
especially with the most developmental system in all of professional sports still. Like there's
right.
no reason that and I'm still like not over that they don't see them pitch until they get drafted.
Oh
Sometimes.
yeah,
Like so for some guys They might not see them pitch until they're in their organization. That's
Or
insane.
there are baseball ops people who will never see a player until he's in the big leagues.
That's insane.
And
I
it's
mean,
happening. I trust me when I tell you. I know, and the person I remember reading the quote from talking about was talking about it from a sense of pride. We draft guys
yeah, like
based on
we've come this far.
we've
Yeah.
got well, they got rid of their scouting department and they added to their baseball ops department. And it just blew me away. But I
More
can
more
totally
ice cream
see it.
bucket helmets in the stadium now that we've saved all that scouting department money.
Exactly right.
That's so
But
ridiculous.
but I try to and I had no problem when I was doing color for baseball. I'll talk denigrate it. I'll denigrate a player for lack of hustle, lack of effort, and all the things that go with that. And I'm not doing that with any of these guys. However, the baseball ops people is a completely different game. That the manager managing Bud Black was managing every player he was managing. The baseball ops people were responsible for putting in uniform, for drafting, for developing, for signing, any of that stuff. You're never in Colorado. You are never going to have to overpay a hitter to come there. Never. I mean, my God, dude. I'm a career 290 hitter. I'm going to Colorado. Wow, I'm going to be a career 310. But you will always, if you don't develop, you will always have to either overpay pitching or sign guys that aren't good enough to pitch elsewhere. No pitchers are kicking the door down.
Side note, also Denver, pretty great place, right?
I loved it.
I was gonna say I like
I
it.
know I've been there in forever. It was my favorite hotel. They had the best, most comfortable beds and the best pillows. But
And it's a beautiful
it's a
place.
beautiful place.
I love that ballpark too. I love
Yeah,
like
I hated it, but I
yeah, I
loved
was
it
gonna
when I
say
wasn't pitching.
altitude and
Right, right,
playing
right.
aside,
Yeah,
being there is very cool. It's a beautiful
right.
place.
But and again, looking at it from a I'm running the organization perspective, there's a this can be done. And I don't want to sound like saying I'm smarter than baseball people, but nobody's figured it out in 30 years because in 5 years you should have from now you should have a baseball operation system that is developing baseball players to play in that environment, and you should have a model for sustained success. And I know exactly in my mind, I know exactly what that looks like. And there's some restructuring and redoing to go around, but you have to get the owner to buy in. You have to give the owner confidence. Hey, listen, this is the path we're going, and you can show it. Literally show it on paper because you bring in like-minded people. Hey, we're going to draft. We're never going to draft a player we haven't had eyes on, but we're going to draft pitchers that fit this profile. If we draft hitters, they're going to fit this profile. Bottom line is you've got you've got a 26-man roster, and if you built a team from scratch and had the ability to take players off any roster, I don't believe there's one player in this roster you would take from that team in the big leagues. And that sucks
Yeah.
because it brings the
And
Ryan McMahon
that's when you have that situation, that's a failure as an organization. That's not any
period.
individual
Period.
guy on that roster's fault.
Period.
I mean,
And I get from ownership, this guy wants to win.
yeah.
And when your baseball people you're paying a lot of money to don't win, you fire them. That's how it works. I get that. For me, I would be a GM there. I would be 100% comfortable going there and saying, "Hey, listen, I need a salary that makes uprooting everything I do now from retirement. However, I would want a 1 year deal and I would want incentive based. I'll take my deal based on the performance of my team.
Do you give any credence to the fact that that division has been such a nightmare the last 5 years?
It's made it worse for them.
Yeah. I
They
mean,
haven't gotten any better, right? If the
it's a
division,
hard
it's a
division
very
to,
hard division,
yeah.
but you should be one of the reasons it's hard
Yeah.
rather than being, oh my God,
The
sweet,
the doormat to that division,
can't wait.
which
We're
is
going to
all they've been.
Colorado.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Right?
the pass go collect
Right.
$200 of that
Right.
division.
Right. Because everything you have to do to make yourself successful at Colorado will make you successful in San Diego and San Francisco and Arizona and Atlanta and Philadelphia. And that doesn't translate now. This team, there are some statistics that are absolutely mind-boggling when it comes to like again, they're hitting 215 as a team. 215 in Colorado. Half their games are in Colorado. Like I said, the game's hard, and you'll never catch me saying anything differently. But this is on the baseball ops people. You need to gut the scouting department, or let's start listening to them. You need to gut whoever's making decisions in the draft. You need to reshape all of it, and you need to create, the Rocky way. And from rookie ball, from the draft to the big leagues, you have a philosophy that all your coaches are aligned on and teaching. And here's the thing: you're gonna have you sit down in that first day and you have a meeting with all the baseball ops people, and the first conversation is, listen, we're getting ready to have some very contentious conversations, but the fact of the matter is, I'm not here as a yes man. I want to hear honest opinions, because no matter what we argue about today in this room, we leave, we're all on the same page. We're not going to have the Rafael Devers conversation with our players. We're going to do things, and there's a Belichickian uh, sense to this. Like, hey, there's a right way and a wrong way to do this. And
I
for
mean, that's what you're talking about, like a
right,
complete organizational
right,
over, like from
buy-in,
top to bottom. Yeah, yeah.
buy-in.
I mean, that's as dejected a locker room as you've
I
probably
can't even
ever been. Yeah, I was
imagine.
gonna say, not even close to anything you've ever been in. You were on some bad teams.
But there's nothing harder than playing on a team and not looking forward to going to the ballpark.
Yeah.
I can't. I've done it, and it's miserable. And I was the ace of the staff on a last place team, and I hated it because it was on the day I pitched. If we didn't win that week in my mind.
I mean, just again, those very small parts of the game that I got to observe, like those buses when you guys lose are not a fun place to
No,
be around.
no.
And doing that, what, 33 out of 40 games? Like that's
Yep.
got to be no, like you're saying, no fun to show up at the ballpark
They're hitting
for.
215 as a team. The White Sox are the only team worse at 214,
Oh,
which is not a comparison you want to make.
God.
Again, this just tells me they're failing in their draft in this sense. Their on base percentage as a team is 283. They're slugging as a team 351. And again, you're playing in Colorado. There's nothing about that makes any sense. And then you go to the pitching stuff. Your ERA is 589. The Mets is 290. Literally half of your ERA. And I'm not talking 339 innings pitched for the staff, 415 hits. You, so for example, for the most part, in a staff, you want your staff to have around a 230-ish opponents on base percentage. 230, 240. Their opponents on base percentage is 302. They're and again, there's underlying stats. Their staff whip is 1.63. Like that's a base runner and a half every inning. 40 games, 7 quality starts. And quality start sucks. Quality start is 6 innings pitched, 3 earned runs. That's a 4.5 ERA. 7 times they've had it happen. And that's not really a metric I go by anyway. But the when I get to this last one, the fielding, they are last, and fielding percentage is not generally something you go by overall. But the fact of the matter is, their fielding percentage is 976. They've committed, more errors than any team in the big leagues. And errors, again, but I guarantee you defensively, metrically there. But see, that's, you can't, those aren't big league baseball players, or they're not finished products. Fielding is something everybody can be good at. The guy that isn't a great fielder,
Fielding is an effort. I mean,
it's an effort
if
from
you're
a
being
work
given
perspective.
if you're
Yes.
being given an error, then that means it was a playable ball, right? For the
Right.
most part.
But a playable ball for Mookie Betts is different than a playable, like Ozzie Smith used to make a couple errors a year more than other guys because he got to more balls.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
There's something where that's not what it is without looking at the stat sheet,
Right.
because or watching any game,
Right.
because of how bad everything else
Right.
is. It's just
That's exactly right. And but again, so if you're not hitting, your on base percentage shouldn't still be. You should have hitters who understand getting on base and working around slumps. They still get on base. Chris Bryant that's why they brought him. Chris Bryant's that kind of guy.
Yeah.
He's on the DL now. But fielding's the same way. It doesn't matter what you're hitting, you should still be one of the premium defensive clubs in the game, especially in Colorado. Because of the environment, I need guys that can cover ground. I need guys who, when the ball gets in their glove, I played with a ton of guys like that. If they caught it, it was an out. That's a baseball player, and they're clearly their baseball ops people are not drafting the right people, or they're not teaching them the right things coming to the big leagues or all the things they need coming to the big leagues. I would that would be an environment where I would very rarely have a guy in the big leagues before he had 500, 800, 1,000 at bats in the minor leagues or 300 to 400 innings in the minor leagues. Because I need to, and again, I go back to I would have my minor league teams at altitude. Got to
Yeah.
teach. I can't have them doing that for the first time in the big leagues. So, all right, what do you got for me, G?
I got a couple things. You want to do a question or you want to do a little trivia?
We can do both.
I'm asking you, which one would you like to do first?
Question.
All right, question. So this comes from our YouTube comments. If you guys would like to have your question asked on the show, feel free to leave it there or on Facebook. But this question comes from Philip Pomerantz, and it kind of harkens back to our discussion about we were talking about pitching in Colorado, pitching at Wrigley.
Right.
But during that discussion, we never talked about the differences of pitching it versus day versus
Day
night.
versus night.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
just talk about that a little bit in your preparation.
It's more of a question for hitters because of and this gets back into almost every question about baseball. An enormous component to that is environment. Hitting in Fenway during a day game could be phenomenal based on the backdrop, or if people in the center field they stop them from wearing white t-shirts for that reason. Like it's a backdrop thing in the daytime or shadows, where the shadows fall. Milwaukee was notoriously bad for hitters because it was dark inside the stadium. And I'm thoroughly convinced I punched out 17 there because of that, because I think it was a day game, getaway day after a night game. Guys were a little tired, and it's hard to see in there. The thing about it is the argument is always the same. No matter how good or bad it is, it's the same for both. Right? It's the
Yeah.
same for both. And so I my first part of my career, I was absolutely atrocious in day games. Atrocious, like bad. Because I didn't know how to prepare for a day game. And my day night splits were dramatically different. And then I learned, and as I got older, I made adjustments. And there are guys, and it was always something I paid attention to. You know, that board I broke down all the judges' stats. One of the things I always looked at was guys' day night splits. Some guys just weren't good hitters in the daytime. And it didn't mean I pitched you differently, but it meant I approached it differently. Like, I need a fastball away here, and I'm facing a guy who hits 177 in the daytime. Okay, I'm okay. And then as opposed to the guy who would hit 399 in daytime and 258 in nighttime. And that's, a lot of times that, and this is true, I've seen it happen. There are hitters who get glasses because they don't realize their eyes aren't as good in one environment or another until they see their numbers.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I think I'm seeing it. Well, you're clearly not seeing the ball the same. And, the daytime thing where's the sun? Is the sun
Yeah.
directly above you? Because when it's directly above you, only half the ball is lit, right?
Yeah.
And when it's on the side, and so that's a thing. You hear good hitters will talk about it too. Arizona was kind of weird because with the roof open, which I never wanted the roof to be open, it would depend on the way the shadows fell.
Yeah.
And there are parks. Dodger Stadium, I think, was one of the famous ones for it. When the shadows got late in the day, the ball's coming out of the sunlight into the darkness.
Yeah. That's ridiculous.
Nightmare to hit. And they would schedule, and teams will schedule around that a lot of times too. The Cubs used to be every game was day game,
Yeah. They still play, I think, more
right?
day
A
games than
majority,
the other team.
right?
Yeah.
But there are guys who and hitters and they're again human beings. We like consistency, and some guys, Cubs guys that played early, and I remember Mark Grace talking about the fact that playing in Wrigley was a dream because you were home by dinner time every single night at home, and you had family, and that was a different environment. But it's one of the reasons why until the Cubs switched to more night games, they never made the postseason. They played a different schedule than everybody. So that's Doc Pomerantz question, by the way. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah, and then the other one was a little bit of trivia I came up with. I wanted to see how you felt about this. I'm gonna call it Guess Your Teammate.
Okay.
So what I have here is 5 clues going from very vague to very obvious.
Okay.
And we'll see where you end up on
Okay.
the chart. 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. So that's like the 10 is the hardest, 2 is the
Okay.
easiest.
Okay.
So this will be the 10.1. My father worked for the Brewers when I was growing up in Wisconsin. Any guess?
Craig Counsell.
Really? Okay. So that was too easy. I didn't know that growing up in Wisconsin would give it away that easy. I asked
The
Pop.
Brewers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I asked Pop right away, my grandfather, and he got that right away. And I go, damn it, that's not easy enough, is it?
Could have
Uh,
been Damian Miller too.
okay, yeah. I was gonna say the other ones were I was drafted in the 11th round out of Notre Dame by the Rockies
I
in
would, yeah, I would
'92.
have gotten that one.
Okay, you would have gotten
I would
that
have
for
gotten the
Notre
Notre
Dame.
Dame one.
Okay. I was a member of the '97 Florida Marlins, where I had a sac fly that sent Game 7 of the Fall Classic into extra innings. I'm the only MLB player to score the walk-off run in a Game 7 of two different World Series. And then the most obvious hint, while most people who watch me would know me by my unique batting stance, newer fans may know me as the manager of the Chicago Cubs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we'll get a little bit
I would have
more.
gotten him with every one of those
I know,
in a
and
sense, but if you think about it, the like I said, I only know two guys, Damian Miller, who was one of my top five funniest teammates ever, and Counts, and they were like big religious Brewer fans growing up, and
so okay,
cheeseheads.
so that's a good place for me. So now I know I got to make them harder.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So okay,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And the Notre Dame one would have given away because he's the only guy I ever played with, I think, with the Notre Dame.
but that's
Uh,
one of those ones where I feel like if you get in your own head enough about, I got to find more. Craig Counsell's a big, even though he's not a big name. You played with all these
oh yeah, yeah.
guys in
But
this game. We'll have, but there will be guys where they had a
Craig
cup of
Counsell
coffee.
is my left-handed hitting Billy Miller.
Okay,
Horribly
okay.
underrated teammate. Great as a teammate and as a player.
That's probably why he's managing, right?
Well, he is, but and it's funny too because the guy that took over from Milwaukee, uh, Pat Murphy, was the head coach at Arizona State. They coached Dustin Pedroia.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
and Murph's a great guy. Jumped right from college to the big leagues, which
I
is
I think that was pretty amicable, the split
yeah
with
yeah.
Counsell from the
Well, yeah,
Brewers,
it was.
because he went and signed with
Well,
Chicago, right?
I
They didn't
think
release him, right?
I think the Brewers.
His contract ended and they did
Right,
not
right.
re-sign him. I'm pretty
Well,
sure is how it
they
went.
let him get into the market, and the Cubs made an
Yeah, yeah,
unmatchable offer because the Cubs recognized what I think the Brewers failed to, which is just how valuable that kind of person is.
yeah.
And he's, and you know, we just like the players get blamed when they lose, the players should get blamed when they win. But there are certain managers, him and Terry or Bob Melvin, their teams are doing well, and in part because of those managers, because they understand managing at a level that few people do.
Well, and it's the reason that, like, no offense, that like the U's and the David Ortiz, like the big name guys on these World Series teams don't usually typically, like Wayne Gretzky's the greatest example I can think of. Not the best coach because this
Right,
type of thing was easy for him.
right. Frank
And
Robinson.
Craig Counsell, Gabe Kapler, you think about guys that you played with that
Yep,
had to grind their
yep,
ass off to get where they were, and to be on a team like that, to play in a Dave Roberts pinch run scenario
yep.
where these guys understand what the moment is
Well, but they understand the makeup of that 25th guy, and they understand how to get him to be important
and to buy in,
and well, right.
like we're
And
talking about.
listen, you're not playing, and here's why. But here's where we're gonna win. If we're gonna win this all, we're gonna need you here, here, and here.
Yeah.
And I tell this story often. Frank Robinson, who I will adore to the day I die, very dear. I loved him to death. Was not a very bad manager. And I remember one day we had a runner on first, and our hitter pulled the ball to the shortstop, and Frank was almost in tears, mad. And his response was, "How can you not hit a ground ball to the right side?"
That's the I mean, it's
Pete
not as
Rose,
aggressive,
same way.
but
Pete Rose,
yeah, there's plenty of examples in
right,
sports where how are you not able to do this thing
right,
that I was doing when I was 11 around 17-year-olds?
right,
Like,
right. How can you not hit a ground ball at 99 miles an hour on the inner half to the right side? It's easy. You just pull your hands in, and the game. But that's why they were in the Hall of Fame, and why Pete Rose was not a good manager, and it was because he couldn't understand how do you not just put the bat on the ball. And it's a hard sport. So,
yeah.
no, that was a good one. Good one. All right. We'll be back on Tuesday, and I don't even know what we'll come up with a topic between now and then.
Yeah. One of our longer episodes in a while. So if you
Yeah.
guys
Hope you
have
guys enjoyed
questions
it.
or things we want to talk about on the next episode, feel free to drop those. We'll be looking out. So thanks for listening.
All right. Take care. Subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Spread the word. We're going to grow. We're going to become something monumental someday, and we're going to be moving and changing software over the next couple of weeks to make this a more a prettier presentation. So we're going to keep grinding at it. Thank you guys for checking us out. Take care.